Hi everyone, it's your daily 10-minute business and finance news wrap for this Wednesday, the 23rd of November 2022. Later, there's 1 week to go to get a company Director ID. What is it? We'll find out. But first to the Australian share market, because it hit a 6-month high today as Qantas upgraded its profit for the half year for the second time in 6 weeks. As a result, the Australian share market rose 0.7% on the 200, 7,231. For more, I spoke earlier with James Gerrish from Shaw and Partners. James, the Australian share market's at a 6-month high. Why? And is the optimism overblown given we are still seeing higher interest rates, inflation a problem, and then there are those China concerns?
There's always going to be a huge number of concerns out there, Ricardo. And when we're reading about them, they're always factored into the market. So I think from my point of view, it was all around bearish positioning in recent months. Everyone was negative. Everyone was underweight equities, and the market often moves in the direction of most pain, and that's been up, and hence we are at a 6-month high. I think there's some other economic factors playing into it that aren't as bad as expected, but ultimately I think it's around positioning.
Okay, there was a lot of talk about central banks starting to ease the pace of rate rises over the past month or so. The RBA did go slower in November, but then we had New Zealand today go 75 basis points. I think that's the strongest ever. What does this then say about the global economic situation at the moment?
Yeah, big move by the RBNZ, I should say, today, no doubt about that. I think, obviously each country is at a slightly different area of their monetary policy journey, I guess. But if you stand back, I mean, the market's now pricing another 125 basis points on the upside for New Zealand, their cash rate peaking at 5.5%. In Australia, we're pricing about 115 basis points worth of further tightening. Our cash rate to peak around 4%. And over in the US, they're pricing about 122 basis points of tightening, and the cash rate to peak just a bit over 5%. So I guess we're all in the ballpark. So I think the key message to take away from that is that the high in interest rates are nearer than perhaps they have been in the last 6 to 12 months or so. So we're nearing a peak, and that's, I guess, one of the reasons why equity markets have rallied. The pace of tightening is starting to slow.
Okay, so even though central banks are tightening around the world and here in Australia as well, consumers are still spending. We saw that today with Qantas issuing a profit upgrade. It's second in about 6 weeks. It says consumers are still willing to spend and happy to prioritise travel over other items. So what do you think this says about the way consumers are feeling at the moment, especially as we lead into Christmas?
Yeah, I think consumers remain at this stage pretty optimistic. Cash levels are high, savings are high, and obviously coming out of lockdowns and the like, people are prepared to spend on travel. I think to the Qantas result, it also speaks to a more rational sector. Obviously, we've had Virgin that's went off the board and got recapitalised and has come back. Qantas is enjoying the ability to price more effectively, and the result today was a phenomenal one. It does speak more broadly around consumer sentiment, etc., remaining pretty robust, and we've seen that in retail sales data more broadly. And it's not just Qantas experiencing this; it's other retailers and other areas of the market that are exposed to consumption.
Can we go into the Qantas result in more detail? I don't know how closely you've looked at it. Given the upgrade, lower debt, record fuel costs still, what's your take on the company?
Yeah, they're producing a huge amount of free cash flow. So I think the profit, they've guided for profit before tax for the half around 1.4 billion. It was about a 200 million upgrade or 150 million upgrade on the numbers they put out only 6 weeks ago. So some of that around, you may mention, of lower debt. Some of that's deferred CapEx that they've put on the back burner. But ultimately, they're seeing huge amounts of demand, and it comes down to this rational pricing. We all know that Qantas has been, you go and look at airfares and see what Qantas is pricing relative to others, but they're, the demand is meeting those higher prices at this point, whether that'll last or not. So if you look at Qantas more broadly, I mean, it's trading on sub 8 times earnings. It's got really strong earnings growth at the moment, and they're operating in a more, as I said before, a more rational market. where pricing is adequate. They're going to continue to throw off a lot of free cash flow. They're about 76% through their buyback, their 400 million buyback. So they'll probably top that up as well. So, it's hard to see Qantas going anywhere but up at the moment, Ricardo.
James Gerrish there from Shaw and Partners. Now, 2.5 million company directors in Australia, and nearly half of them have yet to get a mandatory director ID before the November the 30th deadline. So this company director ID, what is it? Why do you need it? And how do you apply for one? I spoke earlier with Karen Foat from Australian Business Registry Services. Karen, director ID, what exactly is it and why does it need to be done?
Good question. So Director ID is a unique number that every single company director needs to apply for. What it is this unique identifier that makes sure that when a company director is appointed, they are who they say they are.
And when you say company director, who exactly are they and across which kind of fields?
So, a company director is a director of any single company. Now, a lot of people actually think that they're not a company director when they are. So, for instance, if you're running a small business that's set up as a company structure and 1 in 4 small businesses are, then that's in the mix and you need to apply for a director ID. You could also be a director of a charity or not-for-profit, or you could even be, some people have a company that's the trustee of their self-managed super fund. So if you're the director of that company, you also need to apply for a director ID.
And what is this director ID exactly used for?
So director ID makes sure that when someone applies to be, is appointed as a company director, that they are who they say they are. What it enables us to do is behind the scenes to make sure that we're stamping out illegal activity, like when people shut down their business and start up a new one, specifically to try and get out of paying their employees or other businesses that they owe money to. So it's all about making things fairer for people who are trying to do the right thing.
Okay, so how do you apply for one?
The easiest way to apply for a director ID is online at abrs.gov.au.
Penalties for not applying?
There can be penalties if you don't apply for a director ID when you need to. However, what I would say is that for people who are just trying to do the right thing and they might need a little bit of extra help to get their ID done, they shouldn't be too worried about penalties. But it is important that if you are a director of a company, that you get onto this as soon as you can. Just go to abrs.gov.au. And some people tell us that the process is quite quick. So we've got just a week until the deadline of 30 November. So if it's you and you haven't applied yet, just head to abrs.gov.au, try and make some space this weekend to get it done.
Finally, what about support for those people with English as a second language?
So there's a few key ways that people who speak a language other than English can get help to get their director ID. Firstly, we've got a lot of great information on our website, including a really helpful video that's been translated into many languages. So just go to abrs.gov.au and search for your language. The second way that people can get help is by using a translator service. So they do this by calling 13 14 50 and asking to be connected to 13 62 50. So call 13 14 50 and ask to be connected to 13 62 50. And that way you can deal with one of our operators, but you can be working through a translator. So that's the second thing you can do. But the last one is that we know that people who speak a language other than English quite often get help for other obligations, like their tax obligations, through community organisations or their tax agent. And so you can speak to either of those in order to get some extra help and understand what it is that you need to do.
That is Karen Foat there. This SBS On The Money stream is provided for informational purposes only. The content in this stream should not be understood as constituting advice or a recommendation. It is not personal advice and it does not consider your personal circumstances or objectives. You should contact a licensed professional before making any financial decision.